everyone. It's Lorie Brown with empowerednurses.org and yournurseattorney.com. And welcome to our COVID-19 survival guide for nurses and healthcare professionals. And one of the most important things that you need to know about with the COVID virus is what happens if you get sick on the job, or what happens if you get hurt or injured on the job. So today we have a really special guest, attorney Brian Mittman, who took up ice hockey when he was in his 30s and is now over 50 and plays for an over 50 league. And he's going to talk about how this dangerous sport of playing ice hockey and workers' comp, what they have in common, and how you can protect yourself on the job. So welcome, Brian.
Well, I thank you for having me, Lorie, and that's some introduction. Yes, I took up, aside from being an attorney by day, I am an ice hockey player and a wannabe Gretzky by night. And yes, I took it up at 30 and have played hard and on many teams since then. And I think it kind of reflects life, right? Work hard, play hard. You have to get to learn the game. You have to get to know what's going on in order to do the best to help your teammates out and to help yourself. You have to be careful too. I've had a couple surgeries and a few injuries, so I do have to get up in the morning and go to work. And it is always a lot of fun actually playing against some folks. I know a lot of professionals. There's actually some defense attorneys who I play against, so it's kind of fun. Instead of throwing word barbs at them, I actually get to shoot hockey pucks at them. So
that's great.
That's
well, welcome. And now you're an attorney in White Plains, New York, right?
Yes, I have a disability law practice, workers' compensation, Social Security, disability, and other related matters where I represent folks that have either become injured or disabled and unable to continue working. And we then help try to secure benefits for them, whatever programs or insurance that they have. And as you mentioned, White Plains, New York, we're 7 miles from the original outbreak here in New York and New Rochelle.
Wow. And that was an attorney too, right?
Yes. And I think that demonstrated how wickedly this spreads, because he literally took the train back and forth to the city a couple times and went to a few events, and here we are today.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, anyways, you've been at a couple of traumas in our United States history too, being in New York, right? You were
yes. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, we lived through 9/11, and we were in Lower Manhattan at the time. I actually had a beautiful view of both towers from my office window. And we walked out of the dust cloud. We had to deal with the aftermath. And if there's anything I could tell everybody out there, there will be an aftermath. We're going to get through all of this. And I do feel that even though things are still spiraling, there is at least some plans or planning of things going on. And we got to deal with that firsthand, particularly with the effect on workers, the unknown effect on workers, the eventual fights with insurance companies and whatnot, as well as some of the legislation that different states put into place to protect workers that were either injured or killed or could become disabled as a result of 9/11. And it feels, unfortunately, very similar with COVID.
Yeah, it's too bad. So what can you tell nurses and other healthcare professionals how to protect themselves, and what are their rights if they do get injured on the job?
Those are great questions. In fact, I wanted to start out by letting all of your nurses that are following this and share it amongst other nurses and whatever it may be. The healthcare industry, particularly nurses, doctors, medical providers in New York alone, just New York, represents in terms of what they call catastrophic cases, where there are significant lost time or just significant medical injuries, whatever the injuries might be. They are 4 of the top 6 types of industries with injuries. So even before COVID and all of this, we've dealt with lots of nurses and medical practitioners, because frankly, there's a lot of injuries and a lot of things that happen out there. And we've given a lot of thought to what's going to happen, particularly with first responders and frontline responders. And there's both the COVID and coronavirus related direct issues, And there's also these issues of, the folks out there, you guys are, working, you know, 10, 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week. Things happen, injuries happen, accidents happen, you're understaffed, people are out sick. So there's a lot of moving parts that if, we can talk about it and unpack that a little bit, because benefits that you might get, most of it, some of it's clear and a lot of it is theoretical, so to speak.
So it's interesting you bring that up because, the first thing that comes to, our minds probably is getting sick with the virus, but there's so many other ways that nurses and healthcare professionals can be injured on the job.
Yes, it's the typical, right? Everything from lifting injuries to trips, falls, broken arms, legs, bones, keyboard issues, right? We're all electronic medical records now, needle sticks, all the kind of things that probably everybody that's watching this has seen or heard of or experienced to some extent. And then there's this additional issue of the COVID related medical, as well as the mental health aspect.
Yeah,
and
huge.
the stresses and the post-traumatic stress that may come out of this situation, as well as just that general uncertainty. We're all feeling it, not being in the hospital yet. But here we are.
And we are all with all of you out there who are on the front lines. We so care about you and wishing you every day. We pray for you and hope that you're keeping safe so you can keep your patients safe.
And I'm just gonna make a quick little plug for even folks that you can tell loved ones and friends or whatever. My neighborhood, we actually have a doctor that lives in our neighborhood. She came down with COVID. Thankfully, after 14 days, her fever broke and she's on the mend. But the neighborhood itself, there's 20 homes here. We rallied together, and the local hospital is taking monetary donations, but not just money donations. They set up a portal so we can go and order food from local businesses to send it to the nurses and the doctors, and we can't do enough of that. So if you can, think of things like that you can help out.
And if you know a nurse that's a neighbor, send them toilet paper, send them paper towels. They don't have time to go to the store, and they don't have time to find these items that are harder to find. I mean, the whole pasta shelves are gone, marinara sauce is gone, all the easy things to make. So get a little care package for your neighbor who's a nurse or any other healthcare professional.
Absolutely.
So Brian, one thing I don't think I've ever shared with you is that when I was a nurse, I had a needle stick and came down with, fortunately, a subclinical case of hepatitis B. But I didn't know my rights then. I didn't know that I could have a workers' comp claim. And maybe they didn't have it back then. I always joke that I was a nurse when the dinosaurs roamed the earth.
No, they definitely had it. And that's actually, let me for everybody listening, let me give you the basics.
Okay.
And this is super important. This will affect you now, later, in the future, even for some past injuries that you might not have thought about. First things first, workers' compensation first came around in the United States in the early 1900s. And by 1948, all 50 states had a version of workers' compensation, and the federal government did. And basically, it is a state-by-state process, but the general ideas are the same. There's a couple outliers, and I'll talk about that. But again, the idea is this. If you get hurt while you're working, every employer is supposed to have an insurance policy called workers' comp. So you're not suing your employer in most places. You're not suing your employer. And you get medical care related to the injury or illness to be covered by workers' comp. And you get some type of wage benefit if you're out of work. And then if you have a permanent injury, possibly some money at the end of the case. So that's the basics. And I tell people this because a lot of times people will do something, and this is what I've thought about with the current circumstances, right? You suit up, you're dealing with patients, and you bang your knee on something, and you bang it really bad. But you take some Tylenol, you grin and bear it because you're needed, you stay there, maybe you ice it, you elevate it, and you keep going. You don't think much of it, and lo and behold, months go by, and now you're having a knee problem. If you didn't report it to your employer, If you didn't get medical care, it could be a real problem down the road. So if you have any type of physical injury during your time working, just report it. If you can get some medical care, fine, but just report it. Make it happen and say, hey, I screwed up my knee. I'm reporting it. Tell your boss, whatever it is, send it in an email, and then you can deal with it later. Obviously, if you really do hurt yourself significantly, get checked out, please. Those are the two most important things. And then eventually you apply for what's known as workers' compensation. So here in New York, what would happen is you get medical care, you tell your supervisor, your boss, and then you would file a claim with the New York State Workers' Compensation Board. And all this can actually be done online as well. You have enough things to think about right now. But those will be for the physical injuries at this time.
So make sure that you do an incident report or let your employer know that there was an injury.
Right, and I think that I don't want to say the rules will be lax right now, but they're definitely going to be a little more friendly, particularly if you're if you're a nurse that's working during the pandemic. And I know in New York we're pushing, and they're already kind of adjusting not just legislation, but the Workers' Compensation Board itself has already adjusted how people need to do things and what they, what they'll need to do. And we saw this after 9/11 as well. Right? Part of it was like, they walked 50 stories out of a building and then had to walk uptown, and you're telling me no? No judge is going to look at that like, okay. And it's the same type of thing. But just being smart is, if something happens, don't worry. You're not suing anybody. You're making a claim. I always call it file and forget. You can file it and you can forget about it. And if you don't do anything, great. But again, if 6 months down the road, your knee really acts up and you remember, oh my God, during the pandemic, I messed up my knee. Now what do you do?
Well, can the employer retaliate against you?
The lawyer answer is it depends. Yes and no. Technically, an employer cannot retaliate against you. The reality is employers can find, particularly these larger, hospital businesses and whatever, can find ways to try to make your life miserable. But I always tell people again, you document it, and then it depends on what happens. Now, there are a lot of protections. Particularly, there's national, there's state. New York City has its own special Human Rights and Employee Protection Act. So depending on where you are, you will be entitled to file retaliation claims and things like that. So we're planning on and expect not just accidents and injuries, but a lot of employment-related issues, even wage-related issues, because of contracts or overtime or whatever it might be. So that's going to be down the road though.
Yeah, I thought initially before this pandemic, when only a few people were sick, that maybe facilities would argue, well, how do you know you didn't get it from the general community then work? But that's really not an issue now, right?
I'm going to say for most nurses that have worked and can show they were working in a place, it's not going to be an issue. That's so similar to what happened in 9/11. They basically said that if you were, south of Canal Street in New York, which we were, you're entitled to file for the Victims' Compensation Fund, even if you're not sick, just to protect yourself and all of that. If you were in this other area, you are presumed to have been exposed to the toxins that were in the air or whatever it might be. So something like that may happen, or it just might happen by case law and legislation. The interesting thing is this: let's think about the novel coronavirus, right? It's novel because it's a brand new virus that's burning its way through the human population, right? The epidemiologists all talk about it being what it is, and I've learned more than I've wanted to about all of that. I don't know if I can watch another movie like that, but the issue is, and it's a really good point you made, How do you prove that you got it? Well, again, hey, I worked these hours, I was here. It's more likely than not. We recently actually had a nurse last year who had a C. diff exposure.
Oh,
And she had underlying, Crohn's and IBS and stuff, and then she had the C. diff, and it was really bad. And the insurance company was fighting us tooth and nail. And we were finally able to get the report that on the floor she was on, there were a couple patients that she believed she had taken care of or whatever that had it, and she got exposed. And because of her underlying conditions, it was much worse. And she had actually been out of work for a significant period of time. We got her benefits. She's better, thank God, and she moved on. Same issue is going to be with COVID, right? They say that most people are going to get mild symptoms like the flu. So really, you don't file in a workers' comp claim, right? You get the flu from your coworker. Do you file a workers' compensation claim? Mostly no. However, if there are unfortunately deaths related to this, or like there a nursing assistant died in New York yesterday, I believe, unfortunately, from corona-related complications. I would argue that is a workers' compensation case. Then there is this unknown, right? We don't know, is this just a flu-like, it comes, you become immune, it becomes cyclical, or if you have a really bad infection, you get lung damage.
yeah.
Right. So again, this is why if you are diagnosed, there's no reason not to say file and forget. Right. The records are going to be easy. You have it.
Yeah,
Right?
right.
So if you file it, in fact, in New York right now, they are talking about, they're trying to figure out, and from the lessons from 9/11 is how do we structure something so we can at least screen all these cases to say, you know what, no big deal, no big deal. Oh, we have a problem here. You're losing time or whatever it might be. If that makes sense.
You also talked about mental health, and like unfortunately I only can compare this to the military. The military is actually trained on the psychological um, issues associated with dealing, going to war or whatever it is, and they get help afterwards. And I don't know if we're prepared for that. So, what would you recommend for nurses to help with their mental health?
Well, number one, regardless of who eventually pays or whatever, get the assistance and help. There's no stigma to. Well, I mean, listen, I live in New York. Everybody has a therapist. I think my dogs have therapists. So but there's no stigma to it. It's seek out. I do know, for instance, my company, we use one of these PEO, preferred employee organizations. They've already reached out to their 300,000 employees across the U.S. that they have employee assistance, mental health to get through. If you're being stressed out from all of this stuff. The nurses that are on the front lines, I can't imagine. There will be the version of post-traumatic stress. There will be various things that transpire. And again, the most important thing is to speak to a professional in some capacity just to document it.
Right. Go to your EAP. Get the help you need. That's most important.
Yeah.
There was a nurse in Italy who took her life because she was afraid of how many people she may have infected. And that's not what we want here. We're in the business of saving lives. And in order to save other people, we have to save ourselves and take care of ourselves. And if that's our mental health, it's okay. There's no stigma, there's no shame. EAP is completely confidential. Get the help you need. And then if you're continuing to have problems afterwards as a result of this, Brian, what should they do?
Well, so let's say you have whatever your episode is, your anxiety, your depression, whatever it might be that really accelerates because of this situation, and you just can't step foot back in the hospital, and you're going to be out for months, and your short-term benefits run out. Again, it's unknown what benefits are going to be provided, and I think a lot of the hospitals, at least initially, are going to be okay, but we then again also know how they ultimately turn out. They're big businesses. Is see a doctor, file a claim. Now, what we call mental injuries, that is no necessarily physical, if you fall 3 stories from a building and survive and have all these physical injuries and you develop a post-traumatic stress, they they don't dispute that type of stuff. When it's not a direct, the classic example was a secretary hears something, she goes in and sees her boss killed himself,
Mm.
and snaps. And there was a kid went all the way up to the Court of Appeals in New York and said, no, in that instance, she was like in proximity, she saw this, it was something that doesn't normally happen in the course of business. I would argue this is not something that normally happens in the course of your employment like this, right?
Right.
Rarely are you working the hours you're working. Rarely are you experiencing what you're experiencing. Listening to Rosemary on your other interview from she's a New York City ED nurse, seeing what's happened at some of the local hospitals. That is not normal. Now, some insurance companies could be snakes and say, well, everybody, the whole public was exposed to it. And that's actually what the rule is, that if it's something that in New York, the whole public's exposed to it. So again, it's the same thing, is see somebody, file the claim, and while you're out of work, you just have to keep seeing a doctor in order to prove that you're still, quote, disabled because of whatever the condition was.
Yeah. So what about like PRN employees, or like I understand that the Four Seasons in New York is putting up nurses for free if they want to travel there and help. What about like these temporary travel agency or PRN employees?
Yeah, this is going to be a real interesting issue because, again, harking back to 9/11, right? Everyone kind of swooped into New York, swooped into Washington to really help out. So again, it's a state by state issue in terms of if you're going to get workers' compensation. Now, if the federal government then steps in and was able to step in and say, in New York, we're making this special program. They're not really going to do that probably for the United States because it's going to be everywhere. So the issue becomes, what is it that's going to become available? So if you're a nurse who drives up from Texas to come help in New York, there's some issues there. Because one is you're not going to be covered by New York workers' compensation unless they add volunteers. And a lot of volunteers can be covered. There will be issues about that. Plus, depending on who you work for in Texas, can be a real problem because Texas has unfortunately, really, really anti-worker, horrible system. Most employers do not have to have insurance in Texas. So if they decide not to have insurance, they have to put in their own plan, and their own plans are like bare minimum cover nothing. And as I said, different states have different rules. And so it's interesting. Will a volunteer be covered? Volunteers can be covered in New York. Would they be in this situation? We don't know at this point.
Got it. Okay. Well, great. Anything else you can share for nurses or other healthcare professionals to protect themselves on the job?
Yeah. Well, again, just a huge thank you to everybody. I mean, I hope I don't have to see any of you either being sick or after the fact, but the reality we know. So thank you. Again, the most important thing, whether it's COVID related or non-related, if you hurt yourself in some capacity, report it, try to get some medical care. You can worry about filing the claim down the road. If you're in New York, you can call me. There's a lot of great attorneys all over the place. You don't even need an attorney. It's online. Depending on the state that you're in, and we see it spreading everywhere. I actually spoke to 4 or 5 of my colleagues around the country just to kind of get an idea. So for instance, my colleague in Texas was filling me in on kind of the bad part of Texas. Believe it or not, Mississippi has a pretty decent law, and they were the last state to get workers' comp, but it's not the greatest. Alabama's completely different. Connecticut right next door, New Jersey, 3 completely different systems within a close area. So you just want to reach out and get information. You do have some time to file a claim, so don't worry. You don't have years, but if it takes you a month or 2 to wrap your head around it, again, tell somebody, get medical care.
Document it. You guys know that very well. Document it. And like Brian said, even if nothing comes of it, great, even better, but at least you have a record of it.
Yeah.
So So Brian, how can people reach out to you if they would like to? And I know you're in New York, but would you be able to refer people across the country to other attorneys that do what you do as well?
Uh, Thank you. Yes. I have a network of attorneys that I work with in actually all 50 states, and actually some abroad. I've been doing this for a while, and I always find it fascinating to find out what's going on in other places. So, people can reach me by just calling. I don't know where you're putting information, but I can give you my number. It's
Yeah, go ahead.
866-205-2415. And then the website is thedisabilityguys.com. And I can be reached at bmittman, Mittman, at thedisabilityguys.com. And we, as a general course of our business, we screen and talk to people from all over. So any questions, feel free to reach out. There's zero obligation. In fact, I would rather not have cases. But if we can steer you in the right direction, that'll be the most important thing.
Yeah, that's what I always say. We're here to help. Attorneys are service people too. We care about our clients. We care about you. And we just want you to stay healthy. And we thank you for doing what you do. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with everybody. You can sign up for it at empowerednurses.org/COVID. And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode. And Brian, I know you're going through ice hockey withdrawal, and hope to get through this soon and you can go back to it.
I can't wait to get back on the ice. It'll be a little hard to stay 6 feet away from people, but
yeah, right. Well, thank you again. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Lorie. Thank you for all you do.
Bye.